Welcome to Divisionalysis. I'm Fog. Still getting comments on my videos about burst DPS. It's still got its fans saying it's still relevant, it's a constant, it's easy to calculate. Well, today I drive the final couple of nails into the coffin of burst DPS, leave it behind forever, and move on. Let's go. Now, I've already put out 3 videos in regards to burst DPS and its inaccuracy and why I've chosen to move to a new system of calculating DPS. But I'm still getting comments on my videos about how burst DPS is accurate, it's a constant, you're able to measure it accurately, all of these things saying that what I'm doing is inaccurate and that I don't understand burst DPS at all. So for one last time, I'm going to discuss burst DPS and then I'm going to move on. You can choose to continue on with whatever it is that you would like to do in regards to your own calculations, but this is how I'm doing it. Now, I've got to warn you, after you see these things, it's going to change the way that you view DPS. It might even change how people view the game, and certainly how they view weapon selections. So burst DPS advocates, people who have been commenting, people who have based YouTube channels on it, I'm warning you, there will be tears. In a previous video, I showed a DPS graph and how burst DPS is only accurate for the equivalent of that green arrow. Now, burst DPS advocates know this. They know that as soon as the weapon reloads, their excuse is that it goes to a different calculation. It's then a sustained damage calculation. But what I have to tell you is that I lied. Burst DPS is nowhere near as accurate as what that green arrow will tell you. Here we have the burst DPS using the old calculations for a white death, an AKM, and a vector. Ignoring the fact that as soon as the vector runs out of bullets, it starts operating on a different equation, which I've already told you is absolutely bonkers considering it's just damage over time. Nevertheless, we'll just focus on the 2.6 seconds that the vector has bullets available. Now, burst DPS advocates will tell you that the vector is going to win. It has a higher burst DPS. It's a constant, so that's how it's going to work. Well, DPS is not constant. It only appears that way because of the scale, but when you up the scale, in the case of the white death, which only fires 1 bullet every second, you can see that DPS, even inside one magazine, is not a constant. You have averaged what it will do over a period of time. In the case of the vector, you've said averaged over 2.6 seconds. In the case of the AKM, you've said over 5 seconds. You're literally comparing apples with oranges because the vector runs out of bullets, so again, we're only going to compare them over the short term. But here is a graph of the cumulative damage done by each of the weapon systems. And what I want to show you is that here, the white death is winning. Here, the white death is winning. Here, the white death is winning. It has a higher damage per second at every one of these points where the blue line is above the orange. So what that means is even inside the space of one vector magazine being 2.6 seconds, the burst DPS calculation has predicted which weapon has done the most damage only 50% of the time. And there is a fundamental flaw in the way that people have calculated burst DPS since as long as I can remember it. I brought this up in one of my earlier videos, but the algorithm clearly doesn't like it because not that many people have seen it. But it has to do with this gap right here at the start. Every burst DPS calculation that I've ever seen done has been calculated incorrectly. And why? Is because DPS is not constant, but the calculation has averaged over time. And what that means is that they've divided the total time that it takes to fire evenly amongst every single bullet. In the case of a FAMAS, in a second, that's 15 bullets. Where it hits, where the bullet release, so on and so forth, 15. But when it comes to a magazine and firing, there is no bullet cycling on the first bullet. It's ready to go. It is instantaneous. It's no quicker to fire the first bullet on a vector than it is on the White Death. And so what actually happens is that over 1 second, or any period of time, there is an extra bullet that is added to the damage that's done over a period of time. Which means that there are now 16 bullets recorded in the first second. Which means that over 1 second, there is actually 1 extra bullet's damage that is done. Now, it doesn't mean so much for a FAMAS. Well, I mean it does, it's 1/15. What I always say is that if you're going to compare weapons, you need to control damage or time. If you're going to compare DPS, that is. And I've gotten a lot of flack in the comments about you can't control time, you can't control damage, or whatever it may be. Now, I've explained this, but what a burst DPS calculation does, without even realizing it, is that it controls the amount of time. And it controls the amount of time, stating how long the entire magazine takes to fire, and then averaging back over the entire time. So 1 bullet's difference, averaged over an entire magazine, doesn't make a lot of difference at all. But when you talk about small time frames, burst firing, for instance, then the difference becomes significant. When it comes to the White Death, you are doubling the amount of damage that has been done in that first second. Over 2 seconds, it's an extra 50% damage that has been done. And because damage over time is DPS, it has a higher DPS. What the burst DPS calculation will tell you as being the average. Every weapon that has a higher base damage starts with an advantage. And what most people don't realize is, because the scales are much smaller, is that this is the case for every weapon. And because DPS is not constant, when you increase the scale of time, this is what the AKM looks like. And it starts with an advantage over the vector. And as you can see, it sits above the line of the vector whenever it is hitting a bullet. It actually does so all the way out to here. So when rounds are hitting, the AKM has a higher DPS than the vector all the way out to here at 1.1 seconds. At 1.1 seconds, the AKM has a higher DPS. The White Death has a higher still. And what goes from being 50% accurate drops again as far as the burst DPS predictions of which weapon is going to be winning. And more importantly than anything else is that this difference in time, unless you state either the amount of damage to be done or the amount of time over which you're going to measure, you are not going to be able to predict which weapon system is going to win. Here's why. If I say that an enemy is 4 million health, the Vector will kill its first enemy here. It doesn't even complete killing the second enemy because it runs out of bullets, and doesn't kill that second enemy until all the way down here. 4.75 seconds. The AK kills its first enemy slightly behind the Vector. It kills its second enemy here. It kills its third enemy here. And it doesn't quite reach a fourth enemy. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, but the Vector burst down that one enemy quicker than the AK. It has a higher burst DPS. This is where the White Death kills that first enemy. So although the burst DPS calculation said that the White Death had the lowest by a considerable margin burst DPS, it is faster at killing a single enemy. Here it kills its second enemy. It's actually now behind the AK. And there it kills its third, again behind the AK. Considerably quicker than what the Vector does. And what we see is a complete reversal of what the burst DPS calculation tells us should be the order in which things are going to be killing. 1 enemy, 2 enemies, 3 enemies, it doesn't matter. For Vector, AKM and the White Death, just 3 weapon systems, burst DPS successfully predicted who was going to kill enemies quicker exactly 0% of the time. The only reason that this channel exists is to spread information to the viewers in the wider community, and I get it. We've used the same methods of calculation for quite some time, but just because we've done it for a long time does not mean that it's right. I'm not going to always get it right, so keep the comments coming, keep picking me up on stuff, but I won't be engaging in any further discussions around the burst DPS calculation. We're 4 videos in, and I think I have proved on multiple times why it serves as irrelevant to gameplay. So if you want to continue to use it because it's easy, then by all means do so, but I have moved on. This is my method for calculating DPS for the purpose of weapon comparison. So first and foremost, we have to specify how much damage it is that the weapons are required to do. So I ran heroic missions, control points, and worked out that the average wave of enemies was 12, average enemy health pool or hit points was 7.8 million, which means that we asked the weapon to do 93.6 million damage. That's the point at which we need them to reach, and whoever reaches it fastest is going to have the highest average damage per second. In order to quantify this, we need to work out what the average bullet damage is, taking in real-world, in-game stats for damage. So the average armor was 40%, the average that they were out of cover was 82%, and the average number of headshots landed was 8%. So this informs the average bullet damage. How is that calculated? Well, we calculate the damage for every single damage number that we can possibly see. That is armor out of cover, was it hitting armor, were they in cover, was it health out of cover, was it health in cover, and in each one of those, is it a hit to the body, non-crit, is it a hit to the body crit, head non-crit. 16 numbers in total that it's possible for us to see that's at least inside the optimal range of a weapon system. And this is the only numbers that we will see. So in order to calculate what is the average bullet going to do, we need to work out at what rate every one of these 16 numbers occurs when we're playing. Now that's done just simply by working out the percentages that each of them will actually occur. So in the case of an armor out of cover, so we said it was 40% armor, so it's 40%, they're 82% of the time out of cover, 41% of the time it's going to be a non-crit, because the build is set at 59% crit chance, and 92% of the time it's going to hit the body and not the head. For armor in cover, it's still 40%. They're in cover now only 18% of the time. It's still a non-crit being 41%, and it's still a body shot being 92%. So health, it's now 60% of the time we're going to be hitting health instead of 40% hitting armor. So on and so forth, working out what the percentages are for every single type of hit on the body. And when you add all of those up, it comes to 100%. In this case, if you actually do it, it comes to 99.73%, but that's because they're rounded numbers. But 100%. So of all the rounds that I fire, this is the percentage of the time that this particular damage number will occur. So we go back to those damage numbers and multiply them by their percentage occurrence rate. Simple. So we do that over and over again, multiplying each damage number by the chance that it will occur, and that gives us, when you add them all together across all the bullets that I fire, this is the average damage that each and every single bullet will produce. So I apologize that there is confusion around the terminology that's used, because we have used burst DPS to describe just one magazine, no reloads, and its constant average time. But when I refer to these terms, this is what I'm stating. So sustained DPS, we've asked the weapon to do 93.6 million in damage. I now divide 93.6 million by the average bullet damage to work out how many bullets it takes for that weapon to kill that number of enemies. That number of bullets divided by the magazine capacity gives us how many magazines, and then how many reloads that weapon would have required in order to complete those rounds. Some weapons, it will only be 5 magazines. For other weapons, it's 8 magazines before they complete all of that damage, which means that the number of reloads required of that weapon is going to be more. Whatever that number is what applies to that weapon. That's how sustained DPS is worked out. Now I call it burst fire DPS. Not just burst DPS. Burst fire DPS. Apologies if it's caused confusion, but when you are burst firing, it is multiple bursts, and between each burst there is a reload. When I work it out, it's still the 93.6 million, but we're breaking it down into the number of enemies that you are going to burst down. So it's 12 enemies in the average wave, which means 12 bursts from every weapon. Some weapons will take slightly more bullets to kill the enemy, which obviously increases the amount of time that it's going to take them. And then the other factor is how many reloads, or how long that reload is. In every case, every weapon has to do 11 reloads in order to do 12 bursts. So 11 reloads, however long it takes that weapon system to burst down one enemy, multiplied by the 12 enemies, and there you have burst firing, or burst fire DPS. And that's what I did for the last comparison. So round 1 of the assault rifle comparisons, and in that one I said that what was not covered was accuracy, the weapon accuracy, optimal range, and weapon talents. I have since collected all the data necessary in order to include optimal range and also accuracy. So the only thing that's left after this next round will be weapon talents inclusion. How did I do accuracy and optimal range? So this is the graph of each weapon's accuracy over distance. Now I calculated that using the probability clouds that I calculated during my weapon handling series. If you want to see those, that is the accuracy solution where I bring those out and show you. But essentially I'm able to use those accuracy clouds and place them over a target, working out what percentage of the time that weapon is able to hit that target. At varying distances, the amount of probability clouds that exceed the edge of a target, essentially adding a probability that a bullet will have missed. I've worked out how many of those probability clouds, and then I've calculated the area of that cloud or of that particular circle sat outside of the target, and then applied that to the probability, giving us this end result being a graph of each weapon system's accuracy over distance. One thing that I did realize during this process of actually quantifying damage over distance, I mentioned it briefly in my previous videos in regards to accuracy, but the vertical orientation of a weapons system's pull, or its weapon track, weapon recoil path, I underestimated how much that actually affected the overall accuracy of the weapon. And it's quite simply because a target is twice as high as it is wide. So the margin of error for a vertically tracking weapon system is actually much more than what it is for a weapon system that pulls from left to right. And what that actually meant is that the M4 actually did better than what it potentially would have looked like in my accuracy solution video. And also the rail splitter jumped back up to being the second most accurate weapon, second only to the burnout. But accuracy is rounds on target, which means that it is 100% multiplicative stat, which meant that I can just simply multiply that accuracy at that distance by the weapon's average bullet damage or even its DPS and still come out with a new DPS figure. Then we have optimal range. So I was in the process of gathering all the data during my optimal range video, but I've now finished that. And in that video I mentioned that each weapon system has a damage floor. It doesn't go down to zero. There is a floor at which it stops reducing in damage over distance, and it will consistently do that damage for however far out you are from the target. What I worked out is that for the majority of weapons, that damage floor as a base damage figure is 30,557. So it doesn't matter what that weapon started at as far as its initial base damage, it would fall, the majority of them would fall to 30,557. So if it had a higher initial base damage, it means that the degradation over distance is a larger percentage. It falls quicker over time because it's falling to the same figure regardless. So the majority of weapons are at 35,557. But what you can see is that there is actually 5 weapons that are below this figure. So their floor damage is lower. So the grey line at the bottom, that's the Chameleon. The second lowest floor for damage is the FAMAS, which shakes the rankings up a little bit. Then you have the MK16, the Eagle Bearer also has a lower floor, and the Honey Badger also has a lower floor. There was another group of weapons that had a slightly higher floor. Those were the Carbine, the FAL, and the G36. And then the highest floor, it actually might have the same floor, but it was still doing more than its floor out at 100 meters, and that was the Bighorn. But we're not really concerned with all the way out to 100 meters, or even potentially where these weapons reach that floor, because it is at least at heroic, almost never are you going to engage a target out that far. What I'm concerned about is this range. So from 0 up to 50 meters, where I know from my research that this is where the engagements occur. And so the overall DPS figure for a weapon, or the average bullet damage figure, was adjusted based on its optimal range damage at that distance. So 61.5% of the time, everybody or every weapon system is doing its maximum damage, except for the Chameleon, which has an optimal range at only 20 meters and begins to degrade from that point onwards. So it required one extra calculation. 61.5% of the weapon's DPS is done at 100% of its maximum damage. At 26 to 35 meters, that is 27% of the time engagements are going to be at this distance. You can see that on the chart that some of these weapons have already started to degrade. Their average damage is going to drop. So the average for that degradation was worked out over that distance, and then 27% of the DPS of that weapon at that new damage level, or at that degraded damage level, is then applied. Same for out further. It's only 9.5% of the time now, but the degradation has increased, and then it's only 2% out this far. So 4 separate equations, 5 in the case of the Chameleon, but 4 separate equations, just like I did with the average bullet damage. It's that damage that's done over that period or that distance is then multiplied by the percentage of its occurrence, and then all of those separate DPS equations are then added together to produce the average DPS that that weapon will produce over an average engagement in an average heroic encounter. The good news is that I have finished all of those calculations, and I now know which is currently ranked highest DPS weapon across all of the engagement distances that you will encounter within heroic missions. I'm now just putting together the video, and I'll have that out to everyone in the next few days. So apologies for any confusion. This is the last time that I'm going to discuss burst DPS. I'm looking forward to moving on. The next step is round 2 of assault rifles comparisons. If you like, if you want to see some more, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Fog out.